Okay. Thank you very much for coming to this event on long-form journalism in wartime. My name is Jen Stout. I'm a freelance correspondent from Scotland and an author. I'm often working in Ukraine. And joining me is Nataliya Gumenyuk, a prominent Ukrainian writer and journalist, author of several books, co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab and of the Reckoning Project, which trains frontline journalists in Ukraine to gather evidence of war crimes and produces long-form pieces in major outlets. Nataliya, I am delighted that we're here to talk about your work, which I think is some of the most powerful written about Ukraine during these 2 years of full-scale war. My belief, my argument, is that long-form journalism, essays, reported features, narrative non-fiction, is on the rise. I believe that audiences want depth, context, they want narrative, they want characters that they can follow, and the real story, the deeper story, not just the top lines. I think long reads give us this chance to develop characters and to draw our readers into the worlds that we see, and also a way to talk about much bigger topics while combining that with on-the-ground reporting. So Nataliya has written for The Atlantic, for Vanity Fair, Rolling Stone, The Guardian, Foreign Affairs, many others, and we'll highlight a couple of those articles and why they mattered. One is very local, you could say. It's a love story, but no less important for that. And one big sweeping piece that is also based on local reporting, but is really a sociological analysis of the way perceptions of democracy and participation change during wartime. So we'll start with the story that you wrote from Izium, which is a town I know well. It's suffered greatly during occupation and liberation. You wrote this story about Yevhen and Nataliya, a couple in their 60s. It's the kind of piece that never leaves your heart. When you read about these people, they'll always be with you, or I found that. The characters make an indelible mark. Tell me, how did you meet them? How did this come about?
I think later we speak about this kind of journalism which represents the city, but I think that kind of stories which can, I probably start this way. You know, I'm coming from foreign news reporting. That's who I was before the war started in Ukraine. And I was always puzzled that the tradition of the foreign news reporting and the conflict reporting is coming from a bit like exotic way of reporting about something absolutely extreme for decades. And that usually the stories about conflict, it's about some, fighting, somebody which very distant for the people. And it's the tradition of decades. And I actually always try to break it down, trying to portray normal people and just to transfer to the people that, in fact, during the conflicts and during the wars, the life is also, it's not like can be normal, that people can relate to those people. So I always, when there were all these extraordinary agency stories, probably would show the most normal people as possible, to whom the audience can relate. And Izium was horrific because there was mass grave in there. We also, within the Reckoning Project, documented the tortures of the people who lived through the detention. But all of a sudden, there on the street, I met the lady, and they were in their 60s. And she just really said that she just rushed to Izium, and there is her husband, somewhere there, who was always in Izium during the months of the occupation, and that he actually wrote a song for her. And it was not an obvious song. So I asked where the man is, and I came and said oh, there are the rumors in this town that you wrote a song for your wife. And he actually was very proud of that, and you see him with the guitar. You don't see what is there. It's literally destroyed houses around.
I mean, you can see the shrapnel marks in the bench.
Yeah. And the song is called 2,500 Steps. And this number is the number of the steps he had to make to a hill to call her and to find connection at the moment when the city was under the siege. And he just said, do you want me to perform? Of course we wanted, and we recorded that song, which was really, a very simple song written by a man about the love to a wife who is 60. that was probably the most beautiful love story I've ever covered, to be honest. But it was also they also explained me that when she arrived, because she was somewhere cut out, she was somewhere close to Kyiv with the kids, and I separately talked to them, and they recorded, and they expressed how they were separated. But what was important, that was story for the whole town. And when he performed this story for her, there was no light, there was no anything. The whole basement in Izum, they knew that story. It was their story, because they all went to the same hill. And in fact, to be honest, then when I talked to another protagonist of this article who'd been tortured and detained because he was caught up calling somebody, you just understand that these 2,500 steps is really like the symbol of it all. And I would say that despite Izum was horrific at that moment, the news from them were about mass grave, very doomed, very difficult. It was a very positive, heartbreaking story about a huge love of the people in their 60s. I wish we all would be in our 60s in such love of each other.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's stuck in my mind.
And I also would be it was published by Zeit, and probably, papers don't like published poems written by some random people in papers. And they really literally published the poem in the paper, which is pretty, unusual.
Yeah, I think it's so important to stress that at this time, at deoccupation, Izum was all over the international news. There was hordes of international journalists descending on these mass graves, and it was such a horror and so sickening. And that was really what was defining Izum at that time. Of course, naturally, but to find a story like this, which also speaks of the horror, but speaks of the incredible resilience of people, is what long form gives you that opportunity to give space to.
But it also depends on how you treat the people you meet. You can treat them with, of course, with empathy. You feel them with a compassion. I think for us, what also makes us a bit, I think also the Ukrainians, and a lot of people ask how we cope with this tragedy of the war. You're absolutely inspired by these people. If you stop to treat people you meet in the conflict as victims, but treat them as a very powerful individuals who are inspired, the tone is different. You write a different story. It's not about even survivors. I'm not also the fond of this term, but you really don't look like, oh, poor you.
Yeah, it gives people agency, I think. Excuse me, we'll move on because we don't have a huge amount of time. You have written some pieces that I think are sociological. I think they talk about how Ukrainian society is changing. And one that really struck me was about people's perceptions of democracy. This was a piece in Foreign Affairs about a year ago. Can you talk about that briefly? So I try, I know the editors like one line story like that one, that would be preferable. But I usually always think, that sometimes there are so many stereotypes about everything and people are focused in one line. So I usually will talk to as many people as possible. Like the rich and the poor, the officials and the people in the village, the people in the town, and people always trying to find as many people of different political views. Or for instance, have a conversation, being, in a platoon of the army and ask 10 people in there about the very same things. And then you find the way that, because you have a limited space despite of the long format, but then you think, probably if that's important for the most of them, that's probably the story to tell. So in this regard, I think there were a lot of stories about Ukrainian rebirth of the Ukrainian identity up to the beginning of the war, because people didn't know much about Ukrainian identity. I thought, for us, we always exist. We know our history. The difference was that Ukrainians never really had their own state, which was not hostile to them. And in fact, the story of Ukraine for the last 2 years, it's not about Ukrainians finding their own identity. It's about, all of a sudden, they understand that they have also something bigger, because it's just the state who can, defend them. You can't really the volunteers can't save all the people. You sometimes need the state to have electricity, to have water. And then also, talking especially to the people in the villages, you really understand that everybody in such a huge thing, everybody feel the feeling of the empowerment that I do as much as I can in my small place. And that's why I thought no, that's not a story about the Ukrainian identity. We, in fact, speaking about
millions of people and thousands of people everywhere taking the decisions for themselves, and that's how Ukraine it should be represented, not should be represented, but that's probably the story which we sometimes missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The slide just above us is a very recent article, actually, in Foreign Affairs, also by Nataliya, which we just included for some recent context. But there's also been some very big news for you guys for your project, and we can talk about that in terms of the use of long-form journalism to actually have enormous impact and change. So tell us what happened a few days ago.
A few days ago. So I'm coming here from Argentina, where with the Reckoning Project we filed the first criminal complaint on the war crime against tortures into the Federal Court of Argentina. It's the first case of the universal jurisdiction because the Argentinian constitution allows that, and they have the pride on the history of the processes of the trials in particular on the tortures. So we brought one of our survivors within the Reckoning Project. We talked to hundreds of people, and hundreds of them lived through the tortures, and dozens of them lived through electrocution. But that was an incredible personality. For me, everybody's incredible of them, and we really did that. And it lasted for a long time, and I think it's also very interesting that the man is anonymous. There are some sensitivity in the way how we communicate with the stories. The complaint has been written by the lawyers. We talked with the man a while ago. It took almost, a year and a half since the moment his story was recorded until the moment it's actually got to this point. So it's also a bit unusual, but that's also about the way the project works, to deal with that way that, the story can be bigger than, so there is a journalistic part of it, but there is also the legal part of it. And by the way how we do the legal totally doesn't contradict the journalistic part, because the journalism is just more thorough journalism, where you speak to the people in a way that anything they said could be used in the court. But of course you can do it just when you have a bit more time.
Yeah. I mean, time is such an important aspect of writing like this. I mean, sometimes it can take months, even a year, to get a piece together and for it to be published. Can you talk about the process of working like this, of doing long-form journalism at the moment?
It's still a challenge. It's still a challenge with the publishing houses because, contrary to because now we're working together with the lawyers and we're comparing our craft. And in the legal terms, the more similar crime is, the more similar are the way that people are tortured, the more common it is, there is more evidence. It's more solid. It's totally opposite for editors. The more similar crimes are, the more similar are the ways people are tortured, the more of them happens, the less interested they are. So you cannot when we, for instance, collected, more very systematic evidence of the particular type of tortures, of course, some of the publishing houses would say, but we already covered. We already had a story about a man being tortured. And we said, no, but it's a broadest story. So you really need to find the way, to find more nuanced way. But when it's done, then it can stay. It can stay as a solid evidence. It can stay as a book. It can stay as a film, and it would live longer. So, I don't want anybody to be discouraged, because it's very easy to be discouraged. Here there is my colleague Janine Di Giovanni, and at an early stage of the war, when we were promoting and sending our, stories to various, publications, despite how renowned the authors are and how good the stories are, they would also say, it's a bit too long. Can you do just an average news item? That would what we would accept it. But so you can be very much discouraged by that.
Yeah.
But in the end, I would say it's worth it. But it's a huge responsibility as well.
Yeah. I mean, the media landscape is not conducive to a lot of long-form journalism. There are not a lot of outlets that want to have a very long piece. It costs them a lot of money. It takes ages.
I think it's not just a lot about the cost of money. It's really they're all concerned that the audience, has this kind of short span of attention, so they're a bit panicking. So it's really about the particular editors who would understand that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, like me, you previously worked in TV news, in radio, did a lot of daily news, and now you've moved into this format. Why did that happen? Was it almost by accident, or you set out to do more long-form writing?
No, I think we're doing both, because when
sure.
things are breaking and you really need to speed up and you need to be ready, because you know if something is going on, it's your chance and you can miss it, because if you don't do it fast, then nobody would need your long-form story. But again, I'll tell you a totally different story. With one of our reports about the attack on Chernihiv on the very first day when the people died, 47 people died in one of the first air attacks on the 3rd of September 2022, there was this story that, there was one kind of a local drunk guy, in the house. And when the house was abandoned because it was impossible to leave, but still some flats were occupied by the people, he had a key. They left the key with him, because nobody could leave it, and he stayed there. And he stopped to drink. He kind of became, like the guardian for the whole community. And that's what, we know, and we wrote about that. But then when we published the book and invited the survivors and the protagonist of this book for the launch, one of the participants said, after the article was published, we actually printed that article and given to him and said, Denise, see, you were written, there is a story about you in the article. Keep strong, don't drink. And that's the way how he keeps going till now. So, I think, we're speaking about war crimes, we've spoken about the process and trial, possible, case in Argentina, which is big. But that's what you think, like, maybe it was all worse that man.
Yeah, sure. It's the personal connections that you can make and maintain with doing that kind of reporting that I really enjoy. We have time for a couple of questions, if there are anyone. Yes?
A really practical one. How do you fund long-form journalism? Because I know, they raise money for 6 months, etc., etc.
There is no easy way. We are usually donor-funded, but it's quite unusual also for Ukraine for many, many years, having a very broken market, to be funded by donors. And to be honest, it's expensive, but for all of us, it comes with experience. So I cannot count how much article costs. Maybe it was in my mind for 2 years, and I come up to that point. So, it's not really that you come for somewhere and stay for 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 7. I'm this way, like more doing like this patchwork journalism, when you speak for so many people and then all of a sudden you have a puzzle and then it works. How to count that? I don't know.
Yeah, I like the idea of a puzzle, like gathering together all these bits. Yes, Janine. I think there's a mic actually, so.
Nataliya, can you talk a little bit about the 3 kids and how that became the story of the 3 kids that the Reckoning Project did, and how it kind of launched the whole process of finding these stolen Ukrainian children? Because that had real impact.
That's also very interesting that, you always, of course, want to aim big, but you understand that sometimes the big things happen, not randomly, but because you just pursuing your work. So what was mentioned that at early stage of the war, a colleague of ours, Irina Lopatina, she was, working on the case of filtration from Mariupol. It was not a story about separation of kids. And it figured out that the father was separated from the kids, and while she was talking about the father who was kept in captivity, it happened that 3 of his kids were taken to Moscow with absolute, just a courage of the boy. The boy managed, to not to be adopted. He waited till the father was freed and called the father to come. We ran that article in the Vanity Fair in autumn 2022. The story of the separation of the kids was not still big. And then in March 2023, half a year later, there was the arrest warrant to Vladimir Putin and Lvova Belova. And those kids were exactly, met that lady, and they are very public. It's like now a bigger story, but it started sometimes at one thing, then there would be story in half a year, and then there would be, a warrant. There shouldn't be guarantee, as I said, it can't be that all the stories are like that. But
Okay. Another question, anyone? Yes, wait for the mic, please.
Thank you. I am one of those editors who publishes long-form war stories from Ukraine. I'm Romanian, and we work with a freelance correspondent on the ground. She's very young and very brave. Do you have any recommendations for me as an editor or our publications on how to better support her or how to make the process better?
I think it's really, the process better is just to talk. Because sometimes, especially if you're a local reporter, you don't really understand that that's unique. You are in this. You don't understand that it's very interesting. And therefore, you can really enable that opportunity for really talking and chatting what she or he has seen there and would tell, but that is a story. Because I think for us, so many things just became so ordinary, however they are extraordinary. Sometimes you just need to tell that as actually the extraordinary thing. That would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, at the back.
Hi, my name is Suraya and I'm from Bangladesh. So it's a bit, I don't know if it sounds awkward, like many people say that the war between Russia and Ukraine gets more media attention and media coverage and than Israel-Palestinian war. So just because it's geopolitical location and how the global politics evolved. So I want to understand this, like discourse, like how does this work and what do you think? What's
Very
your
simple.
opinion?
In fact, it's very simple. You know, I think that it shouldn't be taken for granted that in the end, usually the wars are happening in the places which is hard to reach, which are very much controlled. So it's very hard to get to Iran, it's very hard to get to Syria, it's even extremely hard to get to Gaza. Ukraine remained democracy with a huge access. Most of the people do not need a visa. They can just jump on the plane and the train and go and be there and be kind of in a good place. Ukraine gives a lot of access. So in a way, it sounds that way, but it's really like the way where a lot of people can work. When I was, a freelance reporter and the Syria war unfolded as a Ukrainian, without funds, I couldn't do that. So in regard, there is a structural things, but I also should say that I'm a Ukrainian reporter, and I know how it's hard to get a Ukrainian story outside. It's extremely hard. And it took a lot of effort of a lot of Ukrainians and society to really do that, mainly because we have this system, and we have, luckily we managed to preserve the country and society who can fight for our voice, and it's a constant work of a lot of people to be heard, which of course to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, I might finish with my own question, cheekily. I'm finding it harder to get interest, media interest, editorial interest in Ukraine at the moment, particularly for daily news stuff. I mean, it's incredible to think, but bombs hitting Kyiv, it's kind of old news. It happens all the time, and they're just less interested. Perhaps long form is a bit easier to pitch because it's more unique stories, more unique characters. How are you finding that in the last few months?
Not a secret, I should say, is that it was not the Ukrainians who were telling this story. I think all the editors said, like, aren't you afraid that, the interest would be in Gaza? And I said, like, of course it should be. Mm-hmm. That's extremely emergent situation. And if people go from Kyiv to Gaza, they should. That's what I, as a Ukrainian, would say. But I think I was always thought, like, look, there would be still this war. It'd still be important. And maybe Ukrainians, my colleagues, fellow Ukrainians, won't like it to hear that way. It's also about Russia. People likes stories about big countries. They're interested in Russia, they're interested in China. So, they cover Ukraine because they can cover Ukraine, because it's actually about Russia for them. So, in a way, it's a bit of the trick. So I'm trying, to use any particular thing, but maybe the final thing to say, but we all, of course, live with a huge burden. For me, I always feel that, like, if you're a journalist and you've spoken to the person, but you didn't write a story, I feel myself like an imposter or somebody very much corrupt if I don't write the story, unless it's there. Because I said, like, people talk to me not because I'm Nataliya and I'm nice. they talk to me that the story is there. And if I didn't manage to publish the story, I kind of tricked them and I misused them, and I really feel very bad. So unless all the stories are kind of getting out from my head, I really feel like very, very bad inside, till the extent I like write as many as possible. We have hundreds now of testimonies within the Reckoning Project on horrible things people
really
live
grim.
through.
Yeah.
They're all very similar, and I'm thinking like, at least we need to give him the right to be heard. So it's a battle, and it's something to really fight. It's not taken for granted. And as I sometimes said as well, that like when the war just broken and the first bomb fallen into Kyiv, it was enough to stay with the mic on the central square, to be on CNN. It's just not that. You don't. So I think like for the first months it was brave but lazy journalism. Now it's a hard one.
Yeah, okay. We've squeezed a lot into 25 minutes. If there are two things that you can take away from this, I please would urge you to check out the work of the Reckoning Project that Janine's here part of as well. And please just read this beautiful story about Yevgen and Nataliya, and it will stay with you like it stayed with me. Thank you so much for your time and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nataliya.